6 people left, not bad. Could have been worse. Now we go to a real thing, to see how this all started, how these names became used. So we go to classical Greek geography. And the rule of the game here is geography. To a certain extent also medicine and anthropology and history, because the Greeks did not differentiate very closely with these. But basically it is about geography. And also cosmology, about how to understand the world. And as a European, I start it from Europe, because Europeans nowadays often feel, especially in public discussion, that Europe is an essence. That Europe is Europe because it's so full of Europeanness. Then we go, but we here understand that Europe is only a name and nothing else. Greece is very important in Europe and European Union, because it is considered to be the civilizational root of contemporary, the present day Europe. For instance, in 2003, when the European Union used to be only 15 members, Western European members, and 10 new post-socialist former Eastern European countries were joining, they went to make the final decision in Greece at the root of Acropolis, which is in the center of Athens, because it was so symbolical. Perhaps you have heard in the news and read in newspapers that there's now a discussion in Europe about throwing or guiding the Greece out of the European Union because of its economic problems. We'll see, it will not be easy to do. I don't think it will happen. It is possible because now the discussion is economic and it is about cool numbers. If we have cultural discussion, like in this picture, at this time, 2003, also at the time when Greece joined, then it would be impossible. It's considered as the root, the basis of European civilization. European understanding from the situation can be drawn in this kind of graph. We have here modern America, United States, North America is included as a kind of child of Europe. Quite similar culture. Also they now have grown stronger than Europeans, but anyway. And this is the place where true civilization lies. Can be also others, but European civilization is considered as the most enlightened one in Europe. And back to history, we have Imperial Europe that conquered almost all of the rest of the world. Europeans still are, especially the British and the French and the Dutch and the Spaniards are proud of that. We who live in the north and never had any colonies don't mind this so much. But this is somewhere in the European Union still. Behind that we had the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire, its civilization and culture was built on classical Greece. And here we have autogenesis, something that was born by itself, without any parents. Because the way European Union history is written, it never goes behind Greece. Autogenesis is a medieval term. it was used in situations where, for instance, we have a piece of cow shit on the field. The cow makes the shit there, and after 2 or 3 weeks, flies come up. And because medieval people were not able to explain how do the flies come up from there, they created this concept of autogenesis, that something can be born from itself. And this is the European understanding of its history nowadays. And it is completely mistaken. It's very mistaken. It is not so. Martin Bernal published in 1987 a very good and interesting book called Black Athena, where the idea is that actually European culture comes from Egypt and also from Mesopotamia. They are parents. The Greeks did not invent themselves, but Egyptians who were Africans, people with black skin, are the originators of European culture. And it would be good if more Europeans understood this, so Europeans would not be so closed into their proudness. But this has not yet become general knowledge. It is spreading into subjective level, but it takes a lot of time. When we look at the Greeks who wrote, published books, important treatises, most of them were not living here in Greece. Or the old ones we have Aeschylus and Hesiodus who wrote stories and poems. And Platon, much read nowadays, was also from Athens. But Platon went here to Egypt to international exchange as a student to learn Egyptian wisdom. Aristotle was from Macedonia, who then came to Athens, but he also worked here in the Asian part of Greece, and then returned to Macedonia. But others, Strabon, very good geographer, Arrian, a diplomat and also historian, Homerus, the old poet, Herodotus, the first history writer, Hippocrates and his school, doctors, medical people, Thales, Anaximander, Hecataeus, philosophers. They all lived here. And Ptolemaios, a geographer, spent all his life in Egypt. So they wrote here, where they were constantly in touch with Egyptian and Mesopotamian civilization. Read those books. Very little was actually done in actual Greece. And Europeans don't know this. One cosmological describing the structure of the world graph has been found in present-day Jordania, in the Middle East, made about 4000 before Christ, which means about 6,000 years from now. It is a painting on a wall of an old building. It's about 2 meters wide, it is big. Nobody knows for sure what it means. But geographers, on the basis of what happened later, about what we have more knowledge, have interpreted it as a map of the world. The oldest extant Mediterranean map of the world, where we have here in the center a capital city, and then the world occupied by humans. It is round, and it is surrounded by water. So sea is always around land. And then maybe we have islands here, but nobody knows for sure. But the Greeks later, they used to draw the world as a round thing surrounded by water. So this is the basis for this kind of explanation. So we have this kind of shape of the world. Then we have words. They were used in the Akkadian language, an empire in Mesopotamia. But 2500 BC, or 4,500 years from now, backwards. One word was Asu, which meant the rising sun, and also the eastern direction, because of this. And another one was Erebu, which meant the setting sun, and also the western direction where the sun sets. And Europe comes from this word, and Asia comes from this word. But also the part of northern Africa, the Maghreb area, where we have Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, comes from this word. It would be interesting in terms of European integration if it also was well known that etymologically Maghreb and Europe come from the same root. But this is never used in European Union discussions, at least I have never heard. So we have this shape, round shape, land surrounded by water, and these words. And they were put together by the Greeks. Homeros, almost 3,000 years ago, in his poems, he wrote also about geography. And this kind of map has been constructed from his writings. Here we have land, surrounded by ocean, okeanos in Old Greek. From the west, and we orient things upwards. We have south up, because south was considered a good direction, where we have warmth, and where the sun is, and where the land is fertile, and where civilization is. Because Egypt was the center of Mediterranean civilization. So it is up. And north, which is cold, full of barbarians, and nothing much happens there. It's a poor place, it's down. So we hear from the great ocean, we have an ocean coming in called Tethys. It means nowadays the Mediterranean, but it also continues to Bosporus and the Black Sea. And then there is a river, the most important river of the classic word, the Nile, called Nilus by the Greeks. This is where civilization is, the history takes place, and this is the center, the place where Nile meets the Mediterranean, and where the Egyptian civilization meets. To the far reaches were Ethiopians in the south and nomads to the north. This is the oldest verbal description of the world geography. And by me, then we go for about 200 years about and get to the poems of Aeschylus. And here we can see the names Asia and Europe. They appear on this cosmological construction at this time. A new river is added, called Phasis, at the end of Tethys. meaning somewhere in the eastern coast of the Black Sea. There was supposed to be a big river. Nobody knows for sure what kind of river was meant, but it was presented as a boundary between Asia and Europe. To the north of us we had Europe, and to the south we had Asia. Question: at what time am I supposed to stop? Today. 4 o'clock? Quarter past 4, okay. Still about an hour. Good, thank you. And still we go forward about 100 years and get to Herodotus, who wrote thick histories, very interesting stories. And Herodotus already gave fairly good descriptions of where these continents are. And he now divided the world into 3 different continents. The language here is Greek. If you can read Roman letters, they are almost the same. Here we have A, S, I, E, Asie. Here we have EU, Ro, Pe. And here we have Li, Bie. The 3rd continent, and here we have the river Nile. Nile was so important a river that it was considered to be so important that it was a division between continents. And west of the Nile, this was called Libya by the Greeks. Nowadays Libya is only one country here, but it used to be the name of the whole continent. Asia is something that is east of the river Nile. So we have half of Egypt is in Asia. Then we have the Arabian Peninsula here, and land all the way to India. But the Greeks at this time did not yet know about lands east of India. But Indian civilization was so famous and known that they knew that. These were fasts. It was supposed to run all the way to the world ocean here, just like Nile runs from the world ocean here through overland to the Mediterranean. The rivers were supposed to start there somewhere in the great world ocean. Here we have Eu, Seinos, Pontus, and this is, as I said, Far Seas. I also have to add that I don't know much Greek. I have had help with all this. But I want to use original characters here, the way it was written a long time ago. Now, as you can see, the clear difference between these continents is that Libya is quite small and it has clear boundaries. The Egyptians actually sent, before they knew, they sent boats from here, many ships, and the king ordered them to sail always forward, whatever comes. And after 3 years, a couple of ships came back. Most of them perished, but a couple of ships came back. And they came back from here. So it was proved that Libya has boundaries. It took a long time because at places they stopped, went to land, sowed the seeds, waited for the harvest so that they have enough food. Of course, they could fish, but also wanted corn. So this was research. It was also known that you can sail from here to India and so on. So these were known places. You could have stories of them all. And these are small. The problem is Europe, because nobody had sailed around Europe, and very little was known about Europe. It would be easy for us to think that big is beautiful and small is not so beautiful. Big is good and small is not so good. This is not true about this big geographical naming. If something is small, it means organization. If something is big, it means that everything that is not necessary here or there is put on this big area. Big means unknown, unnecessary, useless thing. So Europe was considered by the Greeks who lived here as the most useless, most unneeded place on earth. It simply was here at the bottom, cold, inhospitable, hardly uninhabitable. Let's take a look at some of the stories that Herodotus and more Greeks told about Europeans, people who were living in Europe. We have Hyperboreans. Boreus means the north wind. And the way wind was produced at that time was that there's a god somewhere there, north, east, west and south, and they blow air, which creates wind. And Hyperboreans means the other side, on the other side of the north wind. So they were living somewhere behind the gods of wind, to the farthest north. They slept 6 months a year and were awake for 6 months of the year. But they were very peaceful people, respected by their neighbors. So we had also good people somewhere in the north. Arimaspians were people who did not have two eyes, but they had one eye here in the middle of their forehead. They were very warlike. They liked to kill people and always had war with their neighbors except the Hyperboreans, whom they respected. Androphagoi. Andro means human, phagoi means to eat. They were cannibals who lived by hunting other people and eating their flesh. Other people were their game. Agathyrsti. Well, they were also warlike, but they had the social rule that sexual relations are free in their tribe for everybody. So any woman could take any man she wanted at any time, and any man could take any woman he wanted at any time. Everybody was free. The Neuri were people who became wolves every now and then, for a few days of every year, sometimes some longer, some shorter. Otherwise they were human beings, but then they just became wolves and went hunting. Amazons are perhaps the tribe that you have heard about. They were female warriors who had subjugated their men and killed most of them and ruled themselves and were fierce warriors. So you have very different kinds of people living in Europe. cannibals, and peaceful people, and sexual fanatics, and women as leaders and so on. Some Greeks went to see Europe, traveled there. Heracles, a Greek hero, was one of them. He met there in Europe a lady whose upper part was human and lower part was a snake. Then they had sex and lots of children were born. These children are called Scythians. They spoke many languages and were of many ethnic origins, but they were nomads. They wandered around in Europe, hunting and having warfare. And the Greeks also met the Amazons and tried to tame them, but were not successful. But the Scythians were successful, so they married the Amazons, and a new, very wild tribe called Massagetæ, that is considered the forefathers of Huns, who later went also to China. They were born out of this. So this is Europe. It's not civilization. It's completely different. Let's go and see the stories of Asians. In Asia, there lived Egyptians, who were considered the most civilized people on earth. They were at the highest level in terms of sciences and philosophy, and in the way their empire was constructed. At the top we had priests or philosophers, because there was no difference between a priest and a philosopher at that time. Then there were warriors and people doing very kinds of labor. So it was an orderly, caste-based society. And basically all inventions that were made, writing, astronomy, predicting the seasons, and so on, they were invented in Egypt. In Asia we also had Assyrians, who made empires, followed by Babylonians, who made an empire, followed by Persians, who created an empire. In Asia we have civilization. It is a good climate, where you can get good harvest every year, because we still have societies that are mostly agricultural, and who have to create their food again and again every year. And this could be done in Asia. It is also about political organization. Asia wasn't a big place. Usually one empire could cover almost all of Asia. Well, if not India, but India was another one, but nevertheless. And then there was change of these empires. There was clear history. Asia has a history. You can write it to this empire and that empire and so on. It was human history. And this history is that of succeeding political organizations. It was an ordered place. Europe did not have any history. Time was still in Europe. There were only those tribes having warfare, eating each other. And anything that looked like history was that when a Greek like Heracles went to Europe, it was a historical story. Sometimes the European tribes banded together and invaded Asia. The Scythians were once upon a time able to invade these Persian lands. and have them under their rule for 24 years, doing lots of bad things, killing people and killing people and killing people. Until the people there gathered lots of spirits, alcohol, made a great feast for the Scythians, a big party, made them all drunk and then killed them all. And then the invasion from Europe was over. So Europe and Europeans come into these stories only when they do something in relation to Asia. So Asia was the good place. And Libya was also a good place because part of Libya was Egypt. And it was also war. Europe was the bad place. Something that nobody needed. So people here often say that Asia and Europe and so on, they are European concepts which have been brought here. Well, Europeans brought them, but the concepts are not European. They are Mediterranean concepts, originally, which Europeans only later, much later, when they became more civilized and stopped eating each other, adopted. And then later started to spread around the world. But originally they are not European concepts, but quite different. Then I'll introduce to you two good and nice books. One is Tuan Yifu's Topophilia, published in 1974. Tuan is a Chinese Canadian, a geographer, and a good one. And the other one is Mircea Eliade, a Romanian historian of religions, not a geography as such, who published first in 1945 in French a book, Le Muscle de l'éternel retour, but which has been translated into quite many languages, in English, in the 1950s with the name Cosmos and History. Both are nice books, if you once upon a time have the interest of reading them. The argument in the both books is quite similar. The idea is that people and civilization situate themselves in the center of the world. I'm here as an individual, standing right now in Kyoto, and the rest of the world is all around me. And Tuan's other argument is that people become attached to place. Place, territory, where you are, is important for human beings. Of course, I'm a Finn, live in Finland, JyvÄskylÄ, normally. But I have been to Kyoto so many times that over the past 13 years, both Nichibunken and here, that when I come here, I no more come to a strange place, but I feel certain homeliness when I come here. I attach myself to this place. Eliade talks more about civilizations than about human beings. But also he notices from his studies that the idea of center is always very important. The Greeks did not place themselves in the center. They placed Egypt in the center because they were part of this Egyptian civilization. So they were not exactly in the exact center, but in the central area. And outside of them, then there was no civilization. Actually, the concepts that Eliade uses are not civilization and barbarity, but cosmos and chaos, both are Greek words. Cosmos means the known world, the world that we know, which has a structure. It is organized. Things are in their proper places. So it must have human beings who organize the place. And chaos is something that is not organized. It has no definite structure. It does not mean that everything would be bad in the periphery, in the chaos. You have there simply so many different kinds of things that you cannot create a specific, definite pattern out of that. And basically both Tuan and Eliade elevate this center-periphery structure as a part of our normal mental dichotomy. We tend to equate the center, where we are, or what we admire, as civilization. And faraway places from here can be nomads, can be barbarians, can be simply strange and curious things. The normal is here. Normal is our everyday life. And abnormal is somewhere there. And we still have this structure. It is strong with us. And the economic life is using this very consciously. Because if you take a look what is being advertised in terms of foreign travel, when travel agents advertise, they don't show you normal life. They show you holiday resorts, sand beaches. They hint about romance, perhaps. They always advertise faraway places with abnormality. And this is what people want to, they want to go, look, experience for a short while, and then come back to normality. This is the logic of holiday travel, and it is using this inherent logic in our mind. At home it is safe, we know what to do. Far away can be dangerous. The Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs publishes a regular list of countries and places. We have to be careful about this or that. It is there continuously. What we know here, well, we know here how things are, and far away we have mythical things. And here it is what we understand as human, but something non-human or subhuman, lower level beings, or overhuman things can be. It is not only bad things that are somewhere far away. You can have their gods, Santa Claus, fairies, whatever, but something that is not normal life, something that you cannot put into a specific structure. You cannot govern it, rule it. It is a kind of chaos. And this is what we deal with also with the Greeks, who quite naturally, because they were human beings, use this kind of dichotomy to understand the rest of the world. As said, from old times in the Mediterranean culture, it was thought that the earth is a ball. It is round and it is a ball. In European cultural history, there has actually never been the idea that earth would be flat. It is a misconception created in the 19th century. From old times, it has been considered as a ball. and that it has zones. South is up because it is good, north is down because it's not so good. So we start from here. The extreme places are cold. You can't live there. They are so cold. Then we have here the nice area, which is temperate. It has enough rain. The climate is good, and it is habitable. Most people are living here. When we get to the middle zones, it gets hotter and hotter and hotter. So these places are dry. And very few people again live here. So this is the place where we have cosmos. People create empires and states and political organizations. And chaos is here and here. And in the middle, it becomes so hot that nobody can live there. It is burning hot. I don't know why they created this kind of idea, but it also means that people from here, from the northern part, can never go and see the southern part, because they would simply burn to death. And people in medieval Europe still believed in this. When Columbus started his travel, or the Portuguese started their travels, they were afraid of going too much south because of fear of death. And actually the Portuguese ended this kind of cosmology when they actually noticed that you can cross the equator and not burn. Here we have again the same zones, dry and hot. And in the south, there's supposed to also be living human beings in good conditions. And finally we will end to a very cold place in the north. Let's not yet go here. These are Hippocratic climatic zones. And Hippocrates was a doctor. And there are various books from the school he established, a school of doctors. And they were very interested in the influence of climate on human beings. Airsworth's Places is the most famous book from the Hippocratic collection of books. Ptolemy, the geographer, wrote one book called Tetrabiblos, actually meaning 4 books. He also discussed these Hippocratic ideas. And Strabon, another geographer, in his geography, he also discusses these. So these stories can be found quite easily if you go to look at library. The idea was that people in these dry places where there's lots of sun, the sun burns them black. And because they are dry, there's not enough water, they also become small people. And here in the cold, where the Scythians live, there's lots of moisture. And because there's not enough sun, people are white. Because they don't get the healthy rays of the sun enough. And here, where we have Asia, and the northern parts of Libya, and so on. Here people are tall, handsome, beautiful, they have civilization, they tend to be healthy, because they have enough food, and so on. Here people tend to be sick, and they are supposed to have lots of water in their bodies, because it doesn't vaporize. Tend to be fat. And because it is cold, people tend to be not very interested in sexual life, meaning not very many babies. And the Hippocratic school also has stories about the Scythians. Because it's so cold, the men easily become impotent. And if a man becomes impotent, he first goes to pray the gods, and does that for a long while, and tries. If he still does not succeed, he cuts his blood veins behind his ears and lets out lots of blood, and then tries again. And he can do this twice, letting always more blood out. And if nothing helps, he has to conclude that he is no more a man. So he puts off man's clothes, take on woman's clothes, and start to do the work of a woman, and becomes a woman. Because in the north, people are ugly. The man and the women look the same. There's not much difference between them. So it's easy for a man to become a woman, or a woman a man. So simple. So very strong difference between the good area and the bad areas in the north and the bad areas in the south. Clear difference, and this also goes to the difference between Asia, which is the best place on earth, and Europe, which is the worst place on earth. Here it is dry, but it is at least warm. Because warmth is better than cold. So these kind of stories from ethnography about behavior, perhaps also biology about one-eyed people and so on, and then medical stories, they are little by little, by generations, attached to these names. Asia is like this, a good place, and Europe is like this, bad place, and Libya is somewhere in between. So stories create meaning for this name. Then let's take a quotation from Aristoteles, because this is perhaps one of the most famous quotations used by later generations of these two places. The nations inhabiting cold places and those of Europe are full of spirit, but somewhat deficient in intelligence and skill. So they continue comparatively free, but lacking in political organization and capacity to rule their neighbors. The peoples of Asia, on the other hand, are intelligent and skillful in temperament, but lack spirit, so that they are in continuous subjection and slavery. But the Greek race participates in both characters, just as it occupies the middle position geographically, for it is both spirited and to have very good political institutions and to be capable of ruling all mankind if it attains constitutional unity. Aristotle in his book Politics. The Greeks are in the middle position geographically. Aristoteles was not an admirer of Egypt, so he no more put Egypt in the middle, but he put the Greeks there. And he said that Europeans are stupid. So they are not able to create a state, not even a city-state. But they go on wandering the nomad life, so they have freedom at least. The people in Asia are intelligent and skillful in temperament, so they are kind, understanding, intelligent people. But Aristoteles was the teacher of Alexander the Great, who conquered the Persian lands quite easily. So this was a big boost for the Greek understanding of themselves, and they became very proud. If the earlier scholars had admired Asia in general, Aristotle no more did that, but he put the Greeks at the top of the world in this sense. Europeans have tended to take from this quotation the idea that Europeans are free and Asians lack spirit and are in continuous subjection. And they have forgotten Aristotle's argument that Europeans are stupid. And what Aristotle is saying is that Greeks are not Europeans, because Greeks are intelligent people. So this idea that European history, civilizational history, is based on Greece would be shocking for the actual Greeks. They would not believe their ears if somebody went back in time and told them about this. Let's go on. We get now to the Roman period, around the time when Jesus was born and lived. Strabon was a Greek geographer who basically lived here in Asia, went to Egypt, to Alexandria, to the big library there, and then came back here and wrote most of his books there, in Greek. And he changed the boundary. It is no more the Phasis that used to be here. He even contemplated that perhaps Nile should be dropped off from its position as the boundary between Asia and Libya, because the Red Sea, he knew already very well, Red Sea comes almost here to the Mediterranean. But he obeyed the tradition and kept Nile on its place. But here he chose another river, the Don, which now runs through Russia. And this means that Europe now becomes a small place. And as I said before, smallness is a good. And bigness means that you put everything you don't need to that last third big place. The reason for this is that the Romans had now able to create a strong empire, and he was working within the Roman Empire, and the Romans definitely were Europeans. They could not be Eastern Mediterranean people. So the Romans, you had to start talking more beautifully about Europe, not to anger the Romans. Strabon was still orienting his maps towards south. He says quite clearly that Libya is a triangle with its bases in the Mediterranean, so its top has to be to the south. But Europe is now drawn as a small place. Basically, we have these lands conquered by the Romans, and what is nowadays called Northern Europe, also my home country, as islands here. You still have the Scythians wandering here in the forests, but also here now. So Asia was dropped off from its southern good place. Part of it is still in the south, but much of Asia now also acquired northern characteristics of cannibals and warfare and chaos in general. So this is now about 2,000 years ago. The first millennium, first 1,000 years, Asia was always thought as the best place. Now the situation becomes mixed. Everybody did not believe Strabon. people continued reading also old books. And the Greeks actually never decided, is it river Phasis or is it river Don that should be the boundary between Europe and Asia. Procopius was an Eastern Roman historian in the 6th century, and he discussed this issue that both the Phasis as the boundary and Don or Tanais as the boundary would be okay. But by this time, the people here did not no more venerate Egypt so much. Because these maps are round, it's quite difficult to say actually what is up and what is down, because you can't read it from Procopius' text. But the Romans, well, they did much the geography, but I think they started to think of the north as the better, or that's at least not the worse direction than the south. But this debate was never solved. It's like a Kuhnian paradigm. You use it for a while, and then it simply fades away and people stop discussing about it. But the idea is still about a world composed of 3 continents, Libya, Asia, and Europe, surrounded by water. Let's move then to the Romans. The Romans did not do very much on geography. The Greeks were interested in this kind of cosmological questions. What is the world, the universe like? The Romans were quite practical people. They had their empire and they ruled it, and they wanted practical knowledge. So these big philosophical issues tended not to be written by them actually at all. They adopted Greek civilization. The Romans learned Greek language, and they read the Greek books, and we wrote them in Latin, and that's it. The Romans were not interested in these continents, Asia, Europe, Libya. In most Latin texts from the imperial period that I have gone through, Asia does not mean a continent. It means one Roman prefecture at the western end of the land here. And they also have the prefecture here, which they called Africa. And the name of this prefecture spread all over the rest of the continent. And so the name Libya was forgotten, and it at this time turned into Africa. But almost all our Roman writing is about this. So the Roman history of this concept is not so interesting. There are some works of geography or general history that try to discuss also these Greek concepts of these continents. There are not so many of them. Gaius Plinius Secundus, Plinius the Elder, he's also, because he had also a son who also wrote, described this continental divide in one of his books. But the sorry state of the situation is that they tended simply to take without reflecting or miscellaneous things from the Greeks. He had used more than 100 books, Greek books, to compile his history, but simply taken things from here and there. If you read Strabon, the Greek geographer, it is almost like you were reading a contemporary person, a scholar, because he is continuously evaluating and thinking, what is he putting down? What is he writing? Can this be true or can that be true? He's almost like a contemporary person. Plinius is not. He is like, how should I say, not even a first-year university student, but somewhere at school. He takes this and puts here, takes that and puts here. So for instance, he tells that the boundary between Europe and Asia is Don, which should be here. But he also tells that the boundary is from the west to east direction. So is he actually using the idea that Tanais is the boundary? And we have this African prefecture here. So the boundary between Africa and Asia becomes the eastern boundary of the African prefecture. So even Nile, which should be here, is no more so important, but Asia spreads westwards. He also writes about the Chinese. The Romans got silk from China over the Overland Road, or the Silk Road. And he wrote like this about Ceres people. Ceres is what they call the Chinese. Ceres means silk in Latin. So they were the silk people. Excelere hominum magnitudinem, rutilis comis, cerles oculis. The Chinese are taller than ordinary people, with golden yellow hair and blue eyes. So he wrote this on the basis of some stories from the Silk Road. And we don't know which are the people which were referred to as the Chinese, but some people who were living along the Silk Road. But this is an important sentence. We'll come back to this, because much of European racial theory, called the Aryan theory, was built on this. Then let's take another person, Lucius Annaeus Seneca. He wrote about rivers as civilizational boundaries between people and also continents. Qui melius inter pacta et hostilia fuit, Danubius Acrenos, alter Sarmaticus impetus cohibens, et Europam Asiam caedis terminans, alter Germanicus avidam belli gentem repellens. Rivers flow midway between the pacified and the hostile. For example, the Danube or the Rhine, one checking the attacks of Sarmatians and marking the boundary between Europe and Asia, the other keeping back the Germans, a nation eager for war. This kind of short quotation simply appears in the book Naturales Questiones, where he talks about Europe and Asia, the boundary, the rivers, Danube and Rhine in Germany, and also about the Sarmatians and the Germans, who both are tribes that would previously have been called Scythians, but then the Romans have now specific names for them. It would look like this. Well, this here the same thing. Africa is a small place. Here we have the Danube, and Sarmatians are supposed to be living here, attacking Romans. So here is the civilization, here we have the nomads. And because the upper reaches of Rhine are almost in the same place as the origins of Danube, you can actually connect these rivers and say that Asia is all the way to Rhine. So Germany would be in Asia and the Dutch would be perhaps in Europe. We don't know whether he was serious or not. Because what I suspect is that he simply mistook Danube with Don. Because but he was also writing about the rain and so on. I simply think that he was mistaken. But anyway, this argument also went into the books and has been there. We can still read it. The Romans were not very careful about their geography, if I can say it like this. The Greeks, they were much more interesting. But the Romans are important because they transmitted these names and this idea, cosmological idea of a round world, to later Europeans in the medieval Christian period. Because Latin was the holy language with which everything was written, so it was easy for the medieval Europeans to read also these Roman period texts. And from these texts, the Europeans then acquired these concepts and started to use them again in a different way, which we will discuss next time.